Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consol, your host. Two quick things before introducing you to my guest. First, I encourage you to subscribe to this podcast by clicking on the follow button and also clicking on the bell icon so you're alerted to each new edition of the program. Second, in addition to being the producer of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I've written 4 books, 3 novels, and 1 short story collection. In the episode notes, you will find a short link to my Amazon page and all 4 of those titles. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Ruby Peru, who, in her own estimation, is a sloppy workaholic, as well as an independent operator with a weird set of sleep habits and limited knowledge about pop culture. She drives a beat-up pickup truck, and some claim that she's a little bit of a badass. Studying under Kurt Vonnegut in the 1980s and David Foster Wallace in the 1990s. I mean, can you do any better than that? But lo and behold, it made her want to never be a writer. Instead, she wanted to be a person who surfs and climbs and looks cool on a motorcycle. But again, lo and behold, she isn't and doesn't. In other words, none of that came to pass. Instead, Ruby is ready, when you are, to write ever more meaningful things to ponder between the covers of a book. The first novel in her own name is titled Bits of String Too Small to Save. Her most recent co-release, along with Larry Vaughn, is a book titled Business Cards and Shoe Leather. Other than that, Ruby Peru has ghostwritten and co-written many memoirs for clients. On ghostwriting, she claims, "I am the very best at what I do for one simple reason. I am the only ghostwriter working for the public who uses humorous writing style to heighten and explore the events of your life." Ruby Peru, welcome to the program.
Thanks. Can I give you an update?
Oh yeah, go ahead. All
That Book for
corrections,
Larry
deletions.
is a great book, but it's not my most recent. My most recent release is with Pete Del Camara called High Tech Heroes. It's this really interesting book. It's called High Tech Heroes, subtitle, Why Gen Z is Our Last and Best Chance to Save the Planet. And it's all about the pairing of searching for ways to alleviate like climate change and social conflict and stuff like that, and pairing that with like the most high-tech technology that's out there now, and how it's really up to Gen Z to sort of do it now.
Now,
They're the last
bust
chance.
a move. Come on,
Yeah,
kids,
bust a
bust a
move.
move. They're kids to me anyway. Why do you co-write books? Does that alleviate? Let me take a stab at it. Writing is a lonely endeavor, but when you do it with somebody else, now it's not so lonely. Why co-authors?
Well, because I get paid for co-authoring books.
Well, but that's your memoirs, and those are memoirs, right? That you're writing for people.
I write a variety. I write memoirs. But I also write, like High Tech Heroes is more of a business book. So I write whatever people hire me to write. I write a really wide variety of things. This year I'm doing 3 memoirs, so I'm back to memoirs after doing a bunch of like much more technical books for people.
Now you're doing 3 of them. What are you capable of doing per annum? I mean, because I think on your website it says, and I'm not going to hold you to this because there's been inflation, but I think it's like a 3-month process or 3 or 6-month process, and it's 50 grand.
It's 6 months
Um,
and it's 50 grand. Yeah. I mean, if
and
you want
then,
to
so how
write.
many a year can you crank out? Not that that's your only
Oh, I
sustenance.
I always write 2 books at once. That's basically like I'm bored if I'm not writing 2. Sometimes if I don't have a second client, the second book will just be something that I'm writing for myself. So I typically am doing 4 projects a year. I don't have to, but
But
uh
you do because
easily 4
you don't
projects.
sleep. You have sloppy, you're a sloppy
My
workaholic.
mom
You don't
enough to
sleep
do
well at night.
that.
So if you're not sleeping, you might as well be writing. Let me ask you about the memoirs, though. Those are very popular. I mean, biographies, autobiographies, memoirs have always been really popular. Um, what got you? I mean, there's so many people who write fiction and nonfiction,
for basically peanuts. You don't, most books don't sell very well. You actually get paid to do the writing. So you're out front on this thing. I don't know if you ever say, hey, look, I think, I'm going to put a lot of work into this. I think I should take some points on this one because I think you've got a potentially good a bestseller here. Do you ever do that? Do you ever just say, let me have some points on this one, like sales over a certain amount, I get a slice of the pie?
Oh no, no, because you don't make money on books. Books don't make money. There's no
Well,
profit in books. But the
unless you
thing,
write Angela's Ashes, and if it's like, wow, this is the next Angela's Ashes, and I'm writing it for this person who doesn't know how to write, this does look like a book that I'd like some upside potential on. I mean, you're getting paid well anyway, but so you just leave it alone after that. It's just you charge your fee, and that's that.
like a gamble, right? Being a ghostwriter. Like I take a certain fee in order to write a book for somebody else and they can take the credit for it. It's their story. So it's fine with me for them to take the credit. I'm just the person who helped them write it. And then if they can take it and they can make it into a huge bestseller that they can make $1 million on, God bless them. I hope they do. That is so hard to do that if they actually succeed at that, I I think that is great and they deserve everything they can get for it.
Right, right. And so
But
they
for
could they
me, it makes more sense just to take a reasonable payment up front and let them take the risk.
now people approach you with these projects, and then everybody thinks they have a book in them. Everybody thinks they've lived an interesting life. There's so many times I've heard in my life where people tell other people, you should write a book about that. My God, listen to the life you've lived. And it's only been it's a very small something they told them that certainly you can't build a book on. There's got to be a lot more to it. Have you not run into situations where it's like you don't really have a memoir here?
No. Uh, People who call me are typically people who have interesting stories. I've never had anybody call me who's just like the most boring person in the world. Those people don't usually like seek out a ghostwriter. Oftentimes the story that people have to tell is not the story they think they have to tell. They're like they think their story is about one thing, and I have to and after interviewing them, I go, the thing you think is interesting is not the most interesting thing. Here's an example. I had a client who was a businessman and he was so successful that he retired in his 40s. And then he did what he always really wanted to do, which was to do research in Africa, to buy a ranch in Africa and research African wildlife. And he had this whole life in this ranch in Africa, researching wildlife and knowing all these like wildlife photographers and all these just crazy characters and all this stuff. And then he moved back to America and became a businessman again. And he wanted to write a book about business tips on how you can succeed. And I was like, dude, you don't want to write about the 10 years you lived in Africa?
Mhm.
Are you
Mhm.
crazy? So he felt like it's either one or the other. You can't write a book about both. But I figured out how to integrate both of them into one book. Um, and so then it became very different from his original idea.
Gotcha. So, writers sometimes have a voice. Fiction writers try to find or discover their voice oftentimes, and then they write in that voice. I mean, I think Kurt Vonnegut is an example of that, although there's many. Then there's others who say, I'm embodying a character, a protagonist and an antagonist, and so my voice is going to change. When you're writing memoirs, are you do you have the Ruby Peru marks of distinction in the writing, or do you try to embody the client's voice?
Well, I hope I don't have a Ruby Peru mark of distinction because I do try to embody the client's voice and enhance the client's voice so it sounds, uh, better than sounds more literary, you know. Or sometimes a client is like, my voice is not that interesting, but I love this particular author. So can you sort of imitate that author's style, which I'm very good at. I'm,
Oh,
I
they
mean,
will tell you that I like the style, this author's style of writing, and then you emulate.
yeah. You know, some people are like, I wanted to read very romantic and flowery. I've written like Like I wrote a book that was like a bodice ripper romance that was also a memoir about this guy's exciting romantic life, his whole life of romance. And so he wanted it to read like a romance. So I wrote it like that. And I've written somebody's life as a detective novel. And I've written, stuff that's like, just like all different types of styles that people like. It's easy for me to just like read up on whatever author you like and then just sort of write in that voice.
Right, right. That's a skill. That's a skill. A lot of people can't do that. Um, so let me ask you this about
Well, can I say something else about that?
please.
I don't think of it as a skill because it's an accident. Like I noticed that I was doing that as a writer. I would be writing something and I would find that I'm writing just like the person that I'm reading right now. And I'd be like, stop doing that. I'm trying to stop imitating the person that I'm reading so that I could be myself. And then I realized, oh, it took me many years to realize this is actually a skill because I was trying to stop doing it. But it just sort of was natural to me to just like immediately imitate whoever it was that I was reading. So then I decided to try to turn, turn
Well,
it into an asset.
yeah, for sure. Well, I can tell you that back when I was a newspaper writing and reporting coach, I would used to tell the reporters that, look, if you work for Business Week magazine, whether you write to their style or not, you're going to be writing their style because editors are going to turn it into your style. So the trick is write it to their style, write it in that style. A lot of them can't do that; they just can't. So that's why I called it a skill. But because I think a lot of people have one way
Both
of
a
writing
skill
and they
and an
can't vary
asset.
it.
Yeah.
What are the motivations of your clients for wanting to have a memoir produced? Is it,
Wow.
I mean, is it sometimes for posterity? They have a life story to tell and they want their children, grandchildren, great grandchildren to read it? Or
There's a few categories
yeah,
of people. Like one, uh, on the one hand, you have people who are not memoir writers, but more people that I call thought leaders that are more like scientists and people and business owners, oftentimes like a business that's based on a science. And they want a book because the book is part of their business. So the book doesn't, going back to where I said books don't make money, the books typically don't make money on their own, but they can contribute to a larger business that makes money and that the book enhances. So that's one category. That's not a memoir category. And then you have people, yeah, people usually older people who want to write a book for posterity so that, their family members will know everything that they lived through and know like their family history. And sometimes they release them publicly, but usually they don't. They just want it for their family. And then you have people who have been through a really rough childhood and they've been through a lot of just dealing with it in various ways. Some people, go to therapy and deal with it that way. Some people deal with it by just making up their own way of coming to terms with it, and they get to a point where they've so come to terms with their rough childhood that they really want to write a book. They really want to put it down. It feels like the end of an era for them, and they need to write it down in order to finish this process, this psychological process for them. And so that's a big, probably all three of the books I'm writing this year fall under that category.
mm. Now you have a process as well, which you outline on your website. You're saying that a book writing process it's a 6 month experience, and it breaks down like so. That first, let's take these one at a time. The first month, the client needs to set aside 30 to 40 hours of recorded online interviews. So you are what? Skyping? Well, Skype just went out of business, I heard. You're Zooming with them or on
Yeah,
Teams.
I do it as a Zoom call usually. Some people want to interview in person, which I can do, but it's usually easiest for people to do it as a Zoom call. And we usually it's like an hour a day. Just do your schedule, set your schedule up so you have an hour a day to spend with me. And we talk about whatever your story is. And I have all those interviews, recorded and transcribed. So then I can go through and I can
How do you
find.
control the interview though? I mean, no doubt you ask a question sometimes and a person's meandering off into the wilderness and you have to bring them back. Do you say anything up front about this is how I want you to be thinking about answering these questions, or how do you control it?
Well, see, in the beginning, the interviews are just me getting to know the client. So I don't want to control them. I want to let them be themselves. And I just let them start giving me all their information. And then I start going, okay, where's the book here? What is interesting here? If it's a memoir, I'm looking for a personal transformation. Where's the interesting transformation where you used to be this way, you went through a certain experience, and now you're a different way? That's sort of the general idea of a memoir. Or or whatever the book is about. I'm looking for the book as I listen to them. And then as I start to realize what the interesting parts of the book are, I start to guide them and go, okay, I want to talk more about this, or I want to talk more about that. And usually people are pretty, obedient. They answer whatever I ask them to do. But you don't want to let an interview go on too long because people just start to babble randomly. But for the first hour, usually people are pretty focused.
Okay, so that you've done your 30 to 40 hours with them. Then after that, they get to go on with their lives while you go to work. You end up compiling and organizing information into a compelling book synopsis to present to the client. So, um, how often is that process one where they say that looks great versus somebody saying, gee, I don't really want to be characterized that way, or I think you're missing the point, or what have you?
Uh, they always think it's great.
They do. Okay.
I mean, because I often give them a lot of options, and we talk about all that during the months when I'm doing the interview. So by the time I've done all those interviews, I know how they want to be characterized. And so I'll present it as, okay, we could start with this scene and then we could backtrack to the beginning of the story and then go forward from there. Or we could tell it in alternate timelines where it's like your life as you're growing up versus your life now, back and forth, because there's something interesting to contrast. Or we could do this and this, and I'll present a couple of different options for how to structure the story and the advantages and disadvantages of the different structural options. And usually this is my clients hire me because they don't know how to do this stuff themselves. So
Mhm.
they typically are enjoying having all these choices, and they pick the one that they like the best. And um it's a very when I write for myself, I'm not this organized, um because it's a lot of work, but it gives clients a lot of confidence to know this is exactly how the story is going to be structured. And I also work out what style I'm going to write it in, and I show them some pages written in that style. So by the end of the second month, they know what they're getting, what style, what structure, everything, and they can really just relax. There's not going to be a lot of big surprises.
So once you cross that hurdle, then um, you work for the next 3 months producing a 60,000 word book. No, if somebody had a really interesting story, they wanted you to produce something larger, they felt like they had a lot to say, and it was 90,000 words, and I assume you prorate it in some fashion.
Yeah, just add an extra month onto it. I typically write 20,000 words a month, so we can do as many months as you want. But I try to guide, like, I think of it as my job is twofold. On the one hand, my job is to do whatever the client asks me to do. But on the other hand, my job is to advise the client as to what I recommend from a literary point of view.
Hmm.
And typically, a 60,000 word book is really a perfect length for any book because psychologically, in terms of book buying, if it's too short, people feel like they're getting ripped off. And if it's too long, people are intimidated.
Hmm.
So I shoot for that because that is the length that people like to read.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's I'm sure a sweet spot right there, which comes out to what, roughly a 250 to 300 word book.
Two, usually 240, like 240 to 260. It depends on all your publishing choices, like what format size you choose and stuff like that. But
How
yeah, it's not usually
how
260.
how enjoyable is ghostwriting memoirs for you? I mean, how often do you end up writing one where you're feeling I'd rather be writing my own stuff. And this one's not as interesting as the last one I did. I mean,
So that's always
you're
fun.
a mercenary. I mean, you're a hired gun. You're a hired gun.
When I start out, sometimes I'm like, this book is not that interesting. But I have to find a way to make it interesting to the reader, which also makes it interesting to me. So that's part of my job, especially during the second month. I'm going, how can I make this person's life really, really compelling, interesting, creative? And even if it's just even if it's just sort of like, oh, this is a book about my life in business. Okay, blah. What, give me more. What else do you got here? And I'll interview the person until I find out what's really interesting about their life, something that is different from the average person. Most people do come to me with really interesting stories. So I don't often have to like dig that hard. But I will always do interview until I find a story that is interesting to me, because that way I can make it interesting to the reader. So my job is never boring.
We're talking about comedic writing. You say that, or you certainly make clear that this is really important that there be a comedic dimension to the writing. Why is that the case?
Well, humor and comedy are not exactly the same, but um, the people who hire me are people who can laugh at themselves, who like want their book to have a sense of humor, and usually a sort of self-deprecating humor. It's very helpful in memoir to be able to mock yourself, because you don't want to be the hero of every story in every chapter. It's quite boring,
Hmm.
right? You need to be able to show that you've grown through life, which means you have to show some things in your past that maybe are not your best things, so that you can show growth. And so you have to be able to laugh at the things that you've done in the past. And also, the main way that humor comes across is not through like har har slap your knee comedy, but just through letting the person's voice shine through. The more honest people are, and the more they're able to be themselves and be vulnerable, the more funny their style seems, and the
Mm.
more enjoyable it is for people to read.
Yeah, yeah. I think of comedic writing as amusing, and I certainly, the good comedic writers I find is since a lot of people don't. Well, not everybody has the same sense of humor. Some people don't have much of a sense of humor, but it delivers information or characterization or whatever, and embedded in it is something humorous for the people who see it. Let me give you an example. White Noise is my favorite novel. And there are people who read that. I find it to be really funny, hysterically funny. Not laugh out loud. It's just the characterizations and all that, and the scenes are very funny. But there are people who read it and think, "Wow, it was an interesting book. Wasn't it funny? It was an interesting book, but not. No, I wouldn't say funny." Because he's not trying, he's not delivering punchlines. He's not trying to, because that's amateurish, actually, when you're trying to do punchline writing in a novel.
No. Don DeLillo has a unique voice, and if you
Yes.
like it, you're gonna find it funny. You know, that, and some people don't like it. But if you do like it, you're going to be amused by it, because it feels very personal. It feels like this is a real person that's talking to you, with all his flaws and all of his personal interests and all of his like in jokes and stuff like that, and so if you like the personality of the author, then you're going to find the book funny.
Or the characters he creates. And he's really only a couple of books where he's really funny. End Zone and White Noise. His other novels are, he doesn't even attempt to be funny pretty much, but maybe Ratner's Star. But anyway, my point is that it's such a delicate thing to try to be funny or amusing or what have you. Again, that's a skill. Um, I also wanted to ask you about the actual writing process. How do you go about building momentum? How do you go about your writing day? Are you a time and place writer, or are you just, hey, catch as catch can? I write any time of day. I wake up at 3 in the morning. I sit up for 2 hours, then I go back to bed. How do you do it?
I can literally write any time of day. When I first started doing this 20 years ago, writing books for other people, I was like extremely uptight about what time of day I could write and like making sure that I had, I was writing at my best time of day. But I've been doing this for so long now, I can literally do it anytime. I mean, I'm usually when I'm working all day long. It's hard work, and I'll take naps in the middle of the day. Like I just write whenever I can. Sometimes I will exhaust myself from the work and then I'll just be like, it's 3 in the afternoon and I need a nap. I don't know why. It's really random. I don't have a schedule I do have a schedule, but I often break it. So I don't know. Some people are much.
What is your basic schedule? Are you a morning writer? Do you get up in the morning and put in
It
like
depends on what else is going on in my life. If there's nothing else going on in the morning, then I'll be a morning writer and I'll be done by like 2 p.m. and I'll be like, woo, I got the rest of the day free. And if there's something else going on, I'll just write in the afternoon.
so when you call yourself a sloppy workaholic, is it kind of what you were just talking about that you work a lot, you work any time of day, but there's no real, it's very loose, no real schedule to it. You don't have a lot of structure to it necessarily.
Uh, yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that writers are these people that are like kind of obsessive compulsive, like they have to be like, oh, I only write with a certain type of fountain pen and I'm only in like my office at a certain time of day. And writers have that reputation. I'm not like that. I, 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 a lot of writing is thinking. So you have to like, if I'm also a woodworker and I have a wood shop here at my house. So if I get stuck on something, I'll stop and I'll go in my wood shop and I'll work on something. And I'll be thinking about it while I'm doing that. Or
What do you make? What do you make in your wood shop?
well, I'm renovating my house. So I make everything for the house.
So
I'm
it could
building,
be floorboards, it could be a credenza, it could be anything.
yeah, it could be like a dining table. I'm working on a table and a closet right now.
Interesting.
So, and I find that it's great because you're working with your hands. It's a totally different from the intellectual activity of writing. So it lets information just gel in your head. And sometimes I'm actively thinking, and sometimes I'm not actively thinking, but my subconscious is thinking. So, so if I'm stuck on something, I'll go do something else. And then eventually I'll be like, oh, I know what to do there. And then I'll go back to my office and I'll go back to work. Or sometimes I'll wake up first thing in the morning. I figured it out overnight in my sleep. And then I'll be up at 3 a.m. just like writing because it just came to me. So
I
it's
was
like
going to ask you about that, about kind of lucid dreaming or going to bed with an issue in your head and then waking up and it's like, ah, it's clear to me now. That's the trick to solving this writing issue that stumped me yesterday.
often that happens, yeah. I mean, I'm always dealing with writing issues because I'm writing so many things at once. So I could solve problems at any random time. I could be like, oh man, I just figured this out. And I have to like quickly write something down because I'm not at home and I don't want to forget.
What
But
are
also
the keys?
do with people give me what I really like to do is people give me these really complex stories and I have to figure out what the through line to the story is and like how exactly I'm going to tell it and what's sort of like going to be the driving force of the story because it's their life. So it's tons of stuff and a lot of that stuff is irrelevant to the story. So I have to figure out what's the central story and how to like make it amusing and interesting and suspenseful, thereby cutting out the parts that are less interesting and creating like the main through line of their life. And it's very complex. So there's a lot more thinking than there is writing, in the beginning.
Sure, sure. So, what are the keys or the principles to a good memoir?
Well, that basically I just sort of touched on that. Um, when you're telling a story about your life, you want to figure out this is why it's really helpful to have a ghostwriter because it's very hard for people to do this for themselves. Like it's just like trying to see yourself without a mirror. Uh, you want to figure out what is the theme of my life? What is it that my life has become about? Or what did I used to be that I changed and became who I am now? And why is that significant? And why should other people care about that? What does my life have to say about the human condition generally? You know, those are the kind of deep questions that you want to ask yourself so that you can figure out why people should care about your life enough to read about it.
Now, do you read memoirs in your free time? Do you spend time reading memoirs, or is it just kind of like, hey, I write them, I want to be away from them when I do my own reading?
No, I read them all.
You do. Well,
Well, yeah, but I
I'm not
don't
talking
read
about your
like,
clients. I'm talking about,
yeah,
hey,
no, of course.
okay.
I read I read the ones I find interesting. I'm not really into reading memoirs about famous people. I usually find that they're very boring because they're usually more of an autobiography.
And they're dishonest too. They're not going to, I mean, Bill Clinton's not going to write, any more than 2 lines about Monica Lewinsky. And it's like, well, that was a dodgeball right there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Famous people,
presidential memoirs are examples of rotten memoir. They only talk about what they want to talk about, and all
yeah.
the really interesting or struggles, they're not very self-revelatory.
That's why it's not a memoir, it's an autobiography.
Mm.
That's the difference.
Okay, there's your distinction. Okay, can you say a little bit more about that? So,
Well, like
yeah,
I
go
was saying
ahead.
before, a memoir shows a transformation or it's not necessarily about your whole life. Typically, it's not about your whole life. It's about some aspect, some part of your life that you really want to talk about, and some part of it that really affected you deeply, that showed something significant that is interesting to other people because other people can resonate with it, right? It's about being human in the world and a unique experience that you had that gave you some kind of understanding of life.
Yeah.
Not, whereas by contrast, an autobiography is like, I'm a famous person. Here's all the stuff I did in my life. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Here's all
9.
the name dropping.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way about it. I mean, that's kind of how I would kind of the distinction I would make is a memoir is more of a focused part of the life or of a person's life or what have you, rather than a recitation of the whole thing. So stop and think about a guy like Russell Baker, the former New York Times columnist, who wrote a memoir that won the Pulitzer Prize called Growing Up. And he wrote this when he was young. I mean, he wasn't famous as a New York Times columnist yet. And one of the things that I found remarkable about it, are you familiar with that one,
No.
Ruby? Anyway, the thing that's remarkable about it is that there's nothing all that remarkable about his life up to that point, but it's engaging, it's well written, it's engaging. It's not a big book. It probably fits your kind of word count, probably a little bit bigger than that, maybe about 300. And he wins a Pulitzer Prize. And I'm thinking, this guy has not lived that interesting a life, but he tells it with such nuance and feel that it was recognized that way. And then he wrote years later, wrote um, a another one, a second memoir called um, The Good Times. Now, I hope I don't have these backwards, but he didn't, he only wrote a couple of books. I think they were just the 2 memoirs are pretty much it, other than maybe a collection of his columns. And that's part of what I found remarkable that's kind of magical about a memoir is it doesn't have to necessarily, you don't have to live the most interesting life. It's just you have to be able to tell about your life and have instances that people really kind of engage with. You
Yeah.
might check that. Russell Baker, yeah, just a great career as a newspaper columnist and all that. But you might check that one out sometime. But I mean, you can relate to that. You're taking people's stories, and I'm sure oftentimes it's like, hey, look, you're not lighting up the sky, but I can make this thing work and make it something that people want to read.
Yeah. It's telling the story of an, just ordinary life is interesting if you see if you depends on how you view your life, like showing your unique viewpoint and the things that you noticed about the world growing up make it interesting to talk about growing up. because different people notice different things. And if what you noticed is interesting, then you're interesting. You know, some people I interview are like, I don't even remember my childhood. I didn't notice anything interesting. Okay, well, we're not going to go that direction then. But some people remember everything about their childhood, and they remember the characters, and they remember the weather on the day of their baseball game, and they remember every little like detail of the events of their childhood. And that being able to remember that stuff is just golden, because then you can really write an interesting memoir on it. It's a skill to be able to, I don't know if it's a skill, it's a thing that some people have, that they can remember stuff with that much detail. And if you have that, it's great to be able to write a book about it, you know.
Yes, yes. Just to be clear with our listeners, Growing Up, I just looked up Russell Baker's book. Growing Up is his first memoir, the one that won a Pulitzer Prize, and then that was followed like many years later by The Good Times. So I got the titles basically right. Now, what about? Um, I have to ask you about Kurt Vonnegut and David Foster Wallace. I read Kurt Vonnegut's bio. It was a biography written by somebody else called And So It Goes. Loved it. Very engaging biography about him. And although I have to say I liked him better as a person before I read it than after, but it wasn't like I disliked him. What a great, what a great person to study under. Talk about Kurt Vonnegut. What was that like, and why did he and David Foster Wallace discourage you from wanting to write?
No, because they were both tortured souls. I mean,
Well, I knew David Foster Wallace was, but Kurt Vonnegut was as well,
well, he was a cranky old man.
huh?
I mean, he was cranky as hell, and he was always angry about something. I mean, most writers, if you meet them, you don't want to grow up to be them.
So this is consistent with what I said about his biography, but in
Yeah,
in that biography, they did say that one of the things he did in writing classes that students appreciated, they said if they'd bring him an idea, it could be as outlandish as they wanted, and he would say, and he would tell them to go for it. He wouldn't say that sounds ridiculous or too off the wall. Of course, Kurt Vonnegut's writing was very much abstract or off the wall or certainly flamboyant. Um, so he was given to that kind of stuff. So students appreciated him in that regard, according to the biography. But as you say, he was okay, cranky. And did he give good advice though? Did you feel like he gave you some new tools or perspectives?
well, he talked a lot about structuring stories. You know, he talked a lot about building suspense and building story structure, which is handy because his plot lines are really simple, you know,
Hmm.
and so they're kind of transparent. Like once you're looking at story structure, if you look at a Vonnegut novel, you can really see how he structured it. Um, and so that's something that he did a lot more work on that type of stuff than on like nitpicky developmental editing.
What about David Foster Wallace? Well, what was his pedagogy?
Uh um okay. It was more like a study of David Foster like Closet with Dave was like you were more focused on Dave than Dave was on you. He was like just such a character that you're just like, what is he doing now? Like, okay, he was trying to quit cigarette smoking at the time, and so he was using nicotine patches, and he had this like whole thing where he was using like a patch and a half or a patch and 3/8 or a patch and 7/8. Like he would take a patch and he would cut it with scissors, and he would do this in class. This is why I mention it. He would like take a patch and like measure it with a tape measure and like cut it with scissors so that he had the exact right amount, and he would do it. And then he was also chewing uh like tobacco. Like he chewed tobacco, and he
Right.
did it into a clear plastic cup.
Oh, jeez.
So
Not
he
the most, yeah, a little uncouth.
It was like you were always focused on Dave and his bizarre habits the whole time. And all you wanted to do was just like forget what you were writing and just write a book about observing Dave, you know. And he was very like he was a very uptight guy. Like he was very uptight about grammar. He would nail you for any grammatical error. His mother was a grammarian, and she wrote a grammar book, which was the book that he used in his curriculum. He was like, "You have to buy this book." It was written by my mother.
So when the semester was done, here you learned an awful lot about David Foster Wallace, but you didn't necessarily walk away feeling like I've been empowered as a writer in some way.
Um, yeah, that's kind of true.
That's
I
too
mean, you
bad.
always learn a little bit from every teacher, but it's hard to pinpoint exactly what you learn from every teacher. But ultimately, I learned the most as a writer from hiring different developmental editors to go over my work one-on-one. Like I left college for that reason. Like I wasn't learning to be a writer in college. I was just learning to check all the boxes to get a degree that would mean nothing. So I actually went on my own and I just hired developmental editors to go over my manuscripts.
Where did you find good ones? How did you know you had a good one to hire?
Well, I don't remember where mostly there were people who lived in my town where I was living. I was living in Santa Fe at that time, and I I don't know how I met them, to be honest, but they were people who were living there. So I could sit and have a one-on-one conference, just like you were in graduate school, having a conference with a teacher, you know, only with less formality around it and no assignment. And the assignment was just me giving myself assignments. And then I would pay this person, which costs a lot less than graduate school, to go over the manuscript and I would get everything she had to say. And I would make those changes until the next conference I would have with the person, she really didn't have anything to give me. So I'd be like, okay, I'm done with you. And then I'd find another developmental editor who had new things to tell me because she had an expertise in building suspense or something like that. So then I would learn that from her until she had nothing else to say to me. And then I'd be like, I'm done with you. And then I would go and find somebody else. It's expensive to do that compared to using a critique group, which costs nothing, but it's very cheap to do it compared to going to graduate school. And
Right.
much more like if somebody's out there trying to become a writer, I also do developmental editing for people now. And most people don't want to do it. Most people are like, I'll just hire you to ghostwrite it because being a writer is hard and becoming a writer is hard work. It's difficult. You have to want it. You have to be born to it. And I did, and some people do, and if they're willing to like listen to what an expert has to say and follow instructions and improve their work and rewrite it and do it again and keep working on something until it's better and better and better, you will get better. That's how you get better.
So what about you as a developmental editor? Somebody brings let's say a manuscript to you, a perspective novel. What can you tell us about that? Either how you work or what the most common problems you find in people's writing?
A lot of people are still following instructions they got in junior high. Like a lot of people still think, oh, you should put a lot of sensory detail in everything you do. And stuff like that, stuff that you learned in creative writing class when you were a kid. That that is not how you do it. That's kid stuff. Those are exercises for learning how to describe stuff. That's most people don't understand that the psychology of reading. Two things about readers. One, readers are analyzing the characters as they go. Readers are like miniature psychologists. We, as readers, we are all analysts. So when you're a writer, you don't want to do the analysis. You want to present the character and the plot and let the reader do the analysis. So if somebody
Right.
a narcissist or something like that, don't tell the reader they're a narcissist. Describe the person and let the reader figure it out for themselves. So you have to give the reader the opportunity to interact with the book and not do all the work for the reader,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. 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 Just like, yeah, you see that in movies too, poorly made movies where the dialogue tells you the whole story instead of letting the motion pictures and dialogue or whatever narration might be involved in it as well, reveal it. So
Yeah.
here, here it is. We're going to tell. It's just like at the end of one of those cop shows, and you hear the sirens in the distance. Somebody's pointing a gun, and tells them the whole thing. Tells them the whole how they pulled off the
Exactly.
whole crime.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, maybe it's okay for a show like that, but now you got 300 pages to work with, so you've got an opportunity to do something more artistic. So. What was the biggest contribution to your education in terms of it? What did you learn from your developmental editors that was like a eureka moment or some kind of epiphany where it's like, that's going to change my whole approach?
Oh, it's not really like that. You don't learn one thing. You learn a million tiny things and you don't even realize what you've learned until suddenly you're writing and your editor is like, I got no notes. This is good. This is unputdownable.
Mm.
You're like, I don't know how I did that. Have I always been doing that? And then you think back on your previous manuscripts and go, no, I haven't always been doing that. I just learned a million tiny things and now they're all working somehow.
So what about you write you ghostwrite a memoir for somebody and it's like, wow, love it. You did beautiful work, Ruby. Now help me get it published. That's where you step out, right? That's where you say that's not what I do.
Well, not quite. What I do, I've learned over time that my clients get very upset if I step out because they need me to guide them through this and they don't want to be on their own. And I don't do the publishing because all my clients have different, some of my clients already have a relationship with a publisher. Some of them want to self-publish. Some of them want to self-publish and order 200 books right off the bat, which is a certain type of publisher. Some of them just want to self-publish for print on demand. There's like a lot of different types of publishing out there. So I don't do the publishing, but I've been involved with publishing for a long time. Everything from I used to work for McGraw-Hill to I've done a self-publishing of my own books like from scratch to I've worked with published like self-publishers who are like people who just get all the freelancers together for you and they do all the design and they do it for you to make it easier for you. So I've worked with all those different types of people. So I act as a like a consultant, and I'll point you towards the right types of publisher for you, and I'll be on call. So if you get if you're like, what did they mean by this? And I'll tell you, or if you need me to talk to the publisher, I'll talk to them and I'll write a book description for you, or I'll write the back of the book copy. Like I'll help however I can. But you have to, like the client, based on whatever the client's goals are, they're going to choose their own publishing style. And if they want to apply, if they want to try to seek out a publishing agent to get commercial publishing, and if I think that the book is a good candidate for that, I'll write them a query letter and I'll teach them how to do that. It could take you years to find somebody. So I'm not going to do that for you, but I will teach you how to do it. So I just help people down the path of whichever path they want to go on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's
So
also important because there's a lot of ripoffs out there. Like since self-publishing became a thing, there's a lot of scams. So I
right.
can help people avoid that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There sure are. Um, Talk about your novel, Bits of String Too Small to Save. What is the premise? What can you tell us about your novel? And I'm curious whether you have another one in the works or not, but let's start with this one.
So so Business Stranger Small to Save is a kind of an adventure coming of age novel that's kind of got shades of Alice in Wonderland to it, where there's a concept of going through a portal to another world and then having to like go on a big adventure and save the world. And it's sort of a classic storyline, but there's a lot of subplots that are woven in. So it's much more complicated than a typical adventure story. And it's actually for adults, not kids, just because the language is adult level, the plot structure is complex, the sentence structure is complex. So while some of the characters are kids, and while it is an adventure, and while it is also kind of a coming of age, it is actually a book for adults. But I wrote this book. This book is not for everybody. Some people love it. Some people are like, oh Lord, not for me. And the reason is because it's I didn't write it with a commercial publication in mind. I wrote it it started out as an exercise and then it became a book because I was trying to experiment with what if I was always having fun while I was writing 100% of the time. So that's why it's very creative. There's like talking animals and made up languages and just the minute I stopped having fun, I would be like, okay, got to invent a new character, got to bring in some crazy dialogue or something like that. There's a lot of dialogue in it, which is why I made it into an audiobook. It's a dramatized audiobook. So it's like a radio play.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Gotcha.
because there's so much dialogue, I got all these different actors, to do it all. So it's very creative and very like, what is going to happen next? Nobody even knows.
You
And
didn't even know, right? Because you didn't outline it. You
I did
probably,
not. No,
yeah, so
I did
you wrote
not
it
write this.
organically.
Correct. I did not write this book the way I write books for clients at all. I wrote it just like free form, fun, not, and it took me years to take all the stuff that I had written and then organize it into a bunch of subplots that actually come together at the end because it was all over the place. And then I realized that things were happening in different pieces of time and that they didn't go together and I had to like change the ages of characters and change the time frames when things happened. Like it was a very messy writing style. But the result is a book that some people find incredibly interesting and some people don't like at all.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, not everybody's got their different taste. Are you working on another novel now?
I'm working on a Southern novel.
What can you tell us about it without giving it away or jinxing yourself?
It
I don't know if you're superstitious.
I'm not at all. Um it's about I'm a big fan of Southern novels, and this one takes place in Louisiana, and it has a lot to do with the unique quality of Louisiana, um, including a lot of the cultural stuff that's there, like voodoo stuff. There's a lot of West African influence, or a lot of French influence. There's also a big phenomenon that a lot of people don't know about of Bigfoot sightings in Louisiana. So it brings in a lot of really unusual things about Louisiana to make a book that's extremely place-based. Um, and that's all I'm gonna tell you.
Now, is this going to be a romp like your last one? Is this going to be free form, or are you treating this one differently?
It's going to be a little bit more like a classic Southern novel. Yeah, not with
So
a
more structured
more
and
structure,
and
more easy to
maybe
follow.
did you do an outline or do you feel, I mean, if you're going to
No,
structure
I
so
don't write like that. I don't like when I'm doing a novel for myself, it's nothing like when I'm writing for a client, because then it would seem like work. Uh, I start with real people. I never make anything up from scratch. Everything's always based on real people and sort of extrapolate from there. And real people that I know, and then I make it up as I go. Um, but it's a novel about people living their lives. There's a lot of drama, there's a lot of suspense, just like every other novel in the world, you know,
I gotcha. How far along are you?
not very far. Otherwise, I would be like building the suspense more.
So underway, but and you know your destination.
Well, the
Um,
unfortunate thing about getting a lot of work is that it puts my own work on the back burner. But the fortunate thing is I make a living. So this is always a trade-off.
well, let me ask you about that because what you're doing, it's not like there's any shortage of people out there who do developmental editing or book coaching or ghostwriting. How do you is your clientele at this point word of mouth, or do you promote yourself in some way?
Um, well, podcasts like these are helpful, so people can sort of get to know me a little bit. That is a big part of what I do. But my website explains a lot about what I do and what I've done and what my experience is. And my relationships with my clients are such that they tend, oftentimes in the beginning, people are like, I don't want anybody to know that I got a ghostwriter on this. But by the end of it, they're just talking about Ruby Peru everywhere they go. And they typically don't mind me talking about my involvement with the book. So that's why word of mouth helps. And that's why I'm able to show people a lot of the work that I've done and let them read it. Because my clients typically don't mind. They understand that it would be very difficult for me to promote myself if I didn't do that. And I'm usually friends with my clients by the end of the process. So, you know, that helps a lot.
Now, you
Um,
used to live in Santa Fe, you said. Where do you live now, if you don't mind my asking?
I live in Portland, Maine.
Oh, Portland, Maine. Okay, beautiful Portland, Maine. Um, so you and Stephen King get together for a beer and a
Yeah,
Red
we
Sox
have
baseball game once
coffee.
in a while. Yeah.
I
Um,
have heard I'm a musician and I buy my strings at this music store. And I've heard that Stephen King also is a musician and he also buys musical stuff at that same store. So I keep going in there hoping to run into him.
yeah, he's a guitar player. I think he played in a band with Dave. I may have this wrong, but he played in a band with Dave Barry and a few other guys. And yeah, I think I know he likes heavy metal because there's that famous story about somebody they changed the format at the radio station from heavy metal, which he liked to listen to, or rock music anyway, to country, and he didn't like that. So he bought the radio station and turned it back to a hard rock station because he'd be blasting. He's one of those guys who will listen to loud music, hard rock music while he writes. At least he used to. He's, we change over time. How have you changed over time, Ruby? Your writing as you've gotten more experience, as you've gotten older. How do you see your writing has changed? How do you foresee it changing along the way? I'm speaking to your own writing.
Oh, my writing about my own fiction?
Yes.
Um, yeah, well, what I do when I write is I'll write like something will come to mind. Like typically it's a person that I know that I'm like, oh, that is an interesting story. Because I write memoirs for other people, I'm interested in telling other people's stories. It's just become the thing that I do. So when I'm writing what feels like a novel, it starts out as writing someone else's memoir. And I start writing about this other person's life. And so I'll write some pages. And then I'll go, now this is an interesting part right here where they're living in this house that they think is haunted or whatever it is. And then I go in and I expand on that, on the haunted house part of it. And it's like I'm doing surgery on the thing that I wrote. I go in and I expand from the inside. And then I find another, then I look at the whole thing and I go, now this part I think is interesting. And I go in and I may expand it with truth or I may expand it with fiction. But I'll find another part of what I wrote that I think is interesting enough to expand upon. And then I'll write more about that and I'll expand on that. So the story expands from the inside. That's the way I do it. I've developed that technique over time. I've never read of anybody else doing that, but that's what I find interesting.
The expansion method. Uh,
The patented Ruby Peru plot expansion method.
there we go. Maybe too many words. You'll take a pen to that and edit it down, I'm sure. Sharpen it up a little bit. Um, what kind of pickup truck do you drive?
I had a Ford Ranger, but I crashed it.
Ooh,
I actually don't have a truck right now.
ah. Well, because you're in woodworking and all that, I was going to ask you, do you actually use the bed? But you probably did because you'd be picking up wood, lumber, whatever. that you were
Yes,
going to work with?
although I think I'm going to buy a van instead of a truck because it rains so much in Maine that everything you put in it just ends up getting wet and it makes a giant mess.
Yeah, there you
So,
go. Ford Econoline van or something like that.
yeah, in New
That's perfect.
Mexico, a pickup truck was perfect, but now here it's like this
Yeah,
pain.
things are wet. Things are wet. Hey, and by the way, Ruby does, to our listeners, the URL to Ruby's website is in the episode notes, but it's very simple, rubyperu.com. And she does really elaborate on what she does for a living and how she would work with you. So there's good information there, and you can learn more about Ruby on the website. So Ruby, thank you for taking the time. I don't think I've ever done a podcast quite like this one. So I've broken new ground with you, and I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate you taking the time.
It's my pleasure, Mike. Thank you so much for having me on here.